I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm joined by Frank Dillane to talk all about his incredible performance in the movie Urchin. And congratulations, by the way, on just getting nominated for a BIFA award for the film. Wanted to say that. And just
Yeah.
in kind of kicking off and talking about the way that you developed this role, I wanted to ask about some of the work that you did with Single Homeless Project, which is a charity, because, I know Harris also worked with another charity, and that this was something that you spent a huge amount of time doing because both of you really wanted to tell this story in a really specific way and were very conscientious about centering dignity within your portrayal of Mike as a character. And so I was curious about how that really helped you in working with them.
Yeah, well, I was working with SHP for a few years. I haven't worked with them actually since the film because I need to get back in there. Basically, what we do is we set up every Wednesday in a church. It was in a church in Islington. I think the location's moved subsequently, but and we set up with a load of instruments, guitars, drums, sometimes bring recording equipment. I don't run it. Dexter runs it. Before that, it was Rob um, and Jason. And yeah, people just come in. We jam from like 12 till 5. If people want to do guitar lessons, can do some guitar lessons. If people just want to hit the bongos, just come and hit the bongos. If people have some lyrics that they want to try out or do anything really, so that was always a lot of fun. I mean, I just loved it because just an opportunity to just like play really loud music with people, and it was always such a laugh, and people always came with such great ideas, and amazing songs were came out of it. And sometimes someone might come with like a script idea. That was something I was trying to move into a bit more to see if people wanted to, to write a film or all these kinds of things. So it was just a really amazing kind of creative hub. And then Harris is the charity he worked with. Oh God, I hate saying charity, but they are charities. Under One Sky, that was much more about just being out every night, or you could choose 1 or 2 nights a week, or as many as you wanted, and just going around setting up with some teas and some coffee and some clothes and food. And yeah, it was just that really. Dignity and I can't remember what the other word was you used. Yeah, that was something Harris and I would speak a lot about, and always tried to make sure that Mike was dignified, and just like all of us, we always want to feel dignified. And yeah, if ever we weren't sure about a choice or which way we should play the scene or something, that was the kind of fallback position. We'd be like, okay, well, what's the most dignified choice here?
And working with the script, I know you've talked about spending time at a hotel in Eastbourne for about a week and really just going through scene by scene and not moving on to the next scene until you felt like you kind of got it. But I love the way that you've described working with the script and kind of realizing each scene is kind of its own entity, of this character constantly going through the idea of like being born and dying and, the steps forward and the steps backward. And so I just wanted to ask about the time that you spent with the script and how that made you understand the movie in that way.
Yeah, well, the Harris's script, in many ways, isn't the most wasn't didn't read as the most conventional script. It's why Harris is such a visionary, and it's part of his genius is that he thinks differently and thinks outside the box and is able to interpret things in his own particular fashion. So, you kind of read it. Would read the script in the beginning and be like, but what happened? He just did this like in the last scene before, and now he's doing this, and like in the next scene, this happens. But it was very difficult for me to kind of formulate a linear kind of Hollywood story that was sort of resolved with a happy ending, or the hero's journey being this kind of consecutive thing. It took me a while to realize that that was the film, that was the whole point, was that like, well, not the whole point, but part of the point was that like this kind of addiction or certain lifestyles can be incredibly confusing, and it became a very joyful experience and a very freeing experience to me to realize that just to lean into the chaos of each scene, and each moment being new, and not necessarily burdened by what had come before. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of Mike, is that he's forever optimistic and resourceful. So even if, 10 minutes ago the most awful thing has happened to him, he's able to be like, oh well, like, or not even, oh well, maybe not even remember it, and just continue forward, which I think is speaks to our human nature in many ways. I think it's a good quality to have as a human being as well, to be able to progress, and not get too bogged down by all your failures. Of course, there's a fine line. We also have to learn from our mistakes, and all of that stuff. But yeah, I suppose drugs, heroin in itself has a kind of I always thought of there was this something, and again, I'm not a scientist, but there was something I read about heroin, this idea that you're when you become dependent on it, your cells are actually kind of living and dying dependent on your intake. So the longer you go without it, the more your cells are rotting, and then you get it, and then they are reborn, or they grow new cells. And I just thought that this was such a kind of interesting idea, that this character could be continually living and dying in every breath almost.
And there was something you said there about, the idea of being honest with your mistakes, and, nobody is their worst actions. And I love the scene where he's interviewing for a job at the restaurant at the hotel, and he's asked about his past and the conviction. And he's like, completely straightforward, completely upfront. This is what happened. This is what the incident was. This is my past, but that's not my present now. And I was interested in kind of how you found the way to play that, because there's something interesting about just seeing how forthright and how open he is in a way that you don't often see portrayed for moments like that.
Yeah, well, it depends on where someone is in their recovery, I find. With people I know, depending on how serious they are about their recovery, they can grade their story. So you do. I felt him at that moment. Mike was serious, and he had been clean for a bit, and he meant it, and there was nothing to gain from being sneaky about it, and his tactic in that moment was truth and transparency. Perhaps under a different circumstance, his tactic might have been a different one. Yeah, so I remember approaching that scene thinking that. I remember being like, so how serious is he about this? And I remember thinking, yeah, like, what is to gain from lying, and what is to gain from telling the truth in this moment? Because I think there is a part of Mike's personality which is resourceful and ambiguous at times, economical with the information he decides to share, and essentially desperation has its own language. And when the aim is survival, I mean, I think Michael begs, steal, or borrow, to quote the great Peter Doherty. So yeah.
And with what you just said there about, the desperation of survival, we kind of see that side of the spectrum when he gets arrested. And, his line there is he knows exactly what's at stake. So it's, I didn't do anything, he attacked me first. And then I love the way that it just completely changes when they go, you do realize we have the entire thing on CCTV. Did you kind of feel the essence of the comedy that almost lands from that moment when you were playing it? Or was it just kind of about the forthrightness for him? Because it's obviously very serious for him.
Harris actually added that on the day. He was like, yeah, I remember him being like, because the scene was slightly different, and we got on set, and Harris has he likes to be nimble on his feet, and if something isn't quite working for him, he's not afraid to change it as we go. And I remember him adding that, being like, okay, what if you say we've got the whole incident on CCTV, and then what if you just say like, oh, fair enough. So that was very much Harris's little insight there. Uh, so yeah, Harris kept a close eye on these comic timings and comedic moments. I was I often, you know, for me, Mike was facing a prison sentence, so it wasn't I wasn't in the most humorous mood. But I can see now that that it's very funny.
And talked about the scene where, the man on the street, Simon, tries to kind of help him and is walking him somewhere to buy him something to eat. And that's when he attacks him and steals his watch. There's such a franticness and a desperation of, I just need something. I just need a little bit of money. That will be, my next step to getting through the next few days. Did you and Harris kind of play around or talk about the different levels of how far you wanted that moment and the attack to go?
Um, I remember thinking for a while with that scene being like, does the audience want to see it coming or not? You know, making a decision on that to be like, what is best here? Is it best for the audience to be like, oh shit, you know, the minute Mike starts talking to him, or is it better for it to come out of nowhere? And I mean, that's probably just my you know, thick-headedness, because of course it's better that it comes out of nowhere. And that was what Harris had written in hindsight, I guess. But Harris, I think, wanted the violence to be explosive. He wanted it to be surprising, and kind of cruel. Yeah, and it's also part of that moment is kind of, if I'm not mistaken, we relive it later on in the film as being slightly worse than we show it at that moment. So kind of Mike as this unreliable narrator is also part of that scene, being
And
an unreliable narrator. Yeah.
and then obviously coming off the back of that on the other side of things down the line, he has the opportunity to sit down in a restorative justice, meeting and one-to-one with Simon, with the guy from the attack. And you kind of see Mike processing and realizing, actually, what I did had more of an impact than I thought it would. I thought it was just about getting a watch and having something to get me a little bit of money. And when you hear him talking about the way that it impacted him, the way that impacted his daughter to see him, it's really interesting to just see kind of the quiet processing of emotion that's going through Mike, and we almost don't need to see the rest of the conversation, which we don't. And so I just wanted to ask about finding that, because it's such a beautifully played internal moment from you.
Hmm. Um, yeah, that was something Harris and I spoke a lot about, that moment, how it was and how it should be. I think that it's, you know, we have preconceptions of how we want people to behave, how we think that guilt should look like this, remorse should look like that. Um, and I think it's different. Again, just to repeat this phrase, I repeat a lot, that desperation and poverty has its own language. So to bring that language into a new circumstance is also a little bit absurd. It's like, well, yeah, I was strung out and I needed money, and you looked like you had money, and there we go. Of course, it's not a good thing, and it's Mike doesn't quite have the ability to face that demon, I guess, in that moment, to face up to those monsters. So he's sort of blindsided by the whole conversation. I just try to lean into as much as possible the fact that he forgets, you know, and how could he forget? What kind of state would he have to be in to forget that this was happening today? So I just tried to make myself forget as much as possible, so that when it's happening, I guess the scene is more about forgetfulness than it is about remorse.
I love that description. And, kind of going off the back of what you were talking about before with the violence of the attack and kind of how that felt, it's very different to the altercation that Mike has with Nathan, who is the character that Harris plays in the film as well, because that's just such a scrappiness between friends. And it's such a frustration of, you're the one person that I trust, that I told, that knows where I keep my wallet and where I keep my things. And you're
Mm.
the person that's taken it. But again, not to repeat your phrase back to you, but the desperation has its own language, and they kind of understand that in each other as well. And so what were you feeling was important between the two of you in that moment to really express that?
You mean when we fight?
Yeah.
I mean that was it's sort of an anti-fight in many ways. I think that's how Harris describes it. It's like it's silly. It's like two boys. They obviously love each other. They obviously care deeply about each other. Mike feels so betrayed by him. He's obviously in his own pickle. The fight itself was a fun day. We kind of just wrestled, rolled around, kind of went for it, and in a safe way, obviously. So yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, that was a fun day, and it's a fun scene looking back. It's a fun scene, but of course, that's not to undermine the betrayal and all that stuff. Have I answered your question? Can't remember what the question was.
Perfectly. Yeah.
Okay.
Also in playing a character like Mike, there's a lot of space between in terms of the dialogue. There's a lot of moments where he's quietly expressing himself or quietly processing things. And, so when he does speak, what's the importance of that? And I imagine that that gives you a certain latitude of interpretation as an actor, and was curious in how that played into playing a role like this and a character like that.
Yeah, there was a lot about Mike that was in between the lines. There was a lot of deep emotional stuff going on that like from what Harris had written that we didn't necessarily ham up or lean into. So things like being an orphan or addiction or his living situation, hinting at having a history of violence, these kind of things I found could fill the gaps, leaning into the character that Harris and I built, and understanding where he'd come from, what his moral code was, what his moral compass was. It meant that I was able to just be rather than having to fill space with affectation.
It also feels like one of the things that the film does is it kind of looks at the entire infrastructure of support and where a lot of the shortcomings of it are. To see him having a conversation with his social worker, and he's essentially told straight out, yes, we've managed to arrange a hostel for you to stay in for a bit, but there is no long-term plan. And because of your previous convictions and your struggles with drug addiction, we don't have you at top of the list. You're really not going to be the top of the list to get the support that you actually need long term. And I just wanted to ask about the way in which you got to step into this movie and play this very specific story and character, but also it has all these overarching points and discussions at the same time, like that one.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, I am not a politician. In case you didn't, in case you thought maybe I was, I'm actually not a politician or a scientist, as I mentioned before. I know that might surprise you. So I can only really speak about these things artistically. It's incredibly frustrating, the bureaucracy that is attached to rehousing people. It's a real catch 22. You can't get a job if you don't have a house. You can't have a house if you don't have a job. Um, there is so much paperwork, so much identification that you need to supply. You can be on waiting lists for long periods of time. You need to be sober in order to get on these waiting lists. It's incredibly difficult to stay sober when you're living outside. It's like a real omnibus, if that's the right word. It just sort of like eats its own tail. So artistically, looking into that, and from my incredibly privileged position as a middle class person living in outer space, I can there was a lot to do, and I felt a great responsibility to do Mike justice. I have a lot of friends who live in different situations, and I know that that can be incredibly exhausting and demoralizing. So I think whenever you're playing a vulnerable person, the your responsibility is slightly greater. I think.
I also think
Not that
that
Mike is even that vulnerable. He's very resourceful as well. I would say that, he's incredibly tough.
yeah. And even within all of that, one of the details that you kind of really capture, and it sounds like you were very conscientious of, is that idea of little small moments and little details, and what's the meaning of them within his day to day and his world. The idea that when he meets his character Andrea and she holds his hand, no one's held his hand for a while, or what does it mean to have a job and go for a night out with your coworkers, because that's not something that he's had access to as kind of a social component for a while. And so how would you look at scenes in the movie and just find, what's the actual meaning for him and how does this fit into his world?
Yeah, well, this is again the genius of Harris's script, and the it's just testament to his sensitivity that this was. I discovered this was what the film was about. For me, it became about that kind of these small moments meaning so much to us as things do as human beings. Making a new friend if you haven't had many friends, or if your friends haven't been real friends, and making new friends, or being invited out, or getting a job, having a little bit of money, getting in some nice clothes, feeling good about yourself. This was the peak of Mike's life, in many ways. The happiest he'd ever been, possibly, was when he was sitting with the girls and singing karaoke, and he was sober and he had new clothes on. It's human beings. We're sensitive people, and community, friendship, love. We live for these things, and if you have more and more stuff, your heart can become colder and colder to really what's important. So I felt that Mike Mike was the best of us in many ways, because he was honest with his need of people, and yeah, as you say, a girl holding your hand. I mean, is there anything better? When you're young, and you meet a girl, if you think about being young and she holds your hand, it's the most amazing thing. And you get older, and that becomes kind of given, but actually to returning to that very fragile nerve inside us that wants love and acceptance and all that good stuff. So yeah, it can be redemptive.
And you mentioned the karaoke scene, and I did want to ask you about the karaoke scene, because Atomic Kitten Whole Again is such a fantastic choice of song to have the three of you sing. And I've heard that Harris basically gave all of you the note of, I want this to feel really serious and I want the stakes to feel very high in this moment. And I was interested in how that played into the way that you play it for Mike, because he's singing along the whole time, but he gets more and more involved as the song goes on and progresses.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I couldn't. It's funny, as I'm going to sound a bit wet here, but I couldn't stop crying at first, because it was just so. As I said, it was almost the happiest Mike had ever been, and it was so beautiful, and he was sober and feeling good about himself, and these girls wanted him around, and the song was speaking to him in a way that maybe he hadn't quite felt he deserved before. So yeah, but Harris had to, had to tone that down, but also was very encouraging not to lose the intensity of the scene. As I said, I felt it was a joyful scene for Mike, and which made it all the more painful in many ways.
There's also a handful of scenes when he's staying in his room in the hostel where he keeps listening to this affirmation CD, this kind of self-help meditation, which I love the fact that Ruth Wilson is the voice of as well. And at the beginning, he's really earnestly repeating it back, and then later on he's kind of dancing and moving around to it in different ways. And how did you find the different intentions or interactions that he was having with that? Because it becomes such a constant thing that he plays.
Mm. Um. Mm. Yeah, we actually reshot one of those scenes because I we shot it, and I thought, and Harris and I thought after we had shot it, and then we knew we were coming in the next day into the same location, that perhaps we had glossed over how serious Mike should take it. You know, that this stuff, he's taking it very much to heart, and this is serious. This is serious, and this is salvation, and it's not something to kind of have necessarily always going on in the background. He really has to lock into this and feel that it is working. So yeah, with so much of this film, Harris and I just made sure that we were doing making yeah, it's sort of dignity again, isn't it? Right, you know, really having him really listening and really it meaning something to him, and everything, nothing going for nothing, you know. Every scene counted to Mike's journey, and his salvation in some sense. So yes, I do remember us deciding that, hey, we're going to be in here tomorrow. Should we give this another crack? Not that it wasn't good the first time, but just that to really secure ourselves in the heart of it.
And I also did want to ask you about that final sequence of scenes at the very end of the movie, and just, that moment where he's essentially kind of shifting down the hallway, and then you have Harris there, and just this moment of embrace before he's then pushed out the window, where he's completely tumbling before almost just giving in and letting go to it. And I was just really interested in how you and Harris kind of worked together really cohesively to set up that whole sequence of events.
Yeah, I mean that stuff is very much was in Harris's head, you know, and it was his it's his it was his dream in many ways. So I just tried to make sure that I wasn't getting in the way of the audience, and insert little things that I could, like a sense of relief when seeing Jason, and love. But otherwise, I remember being like leaning on Harris a lot and being like, okay, what do you want? You want just walk in? And he'd be like, yeah, very, very still, you know, not too much facial stuff. It's like a dream sequence. So just trying to get out of the way of it as much as possible.
Yeah, no, it's beautifully done, and you've given such a fantastic performance in the film. So thank you so much for talking about it. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this. Thank you, Mara.